How are organisations from small startups to large corporations working together to take on some of our biggest global challenges, like the food system? The Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Big Food Redesign Challenge set out to demonstrate how redesigning products in line with circular economy principles can create a food system that allows nature to thrive. In this episode, I'll be talking to one of those redesigners, Chloe Stewart from Nibs, etc. We'll also be hearing from Katie Carson, Director of Corporate Affairs for Food and Climate Policy at Tetra Pak, about the importance of supporting small startups and SMEs to foster that innovation. Chloe, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you in the studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, before we get into the really juicy stuff, simply for the clarity of people at home who may be listening and not know, what do we mean by upcycled ingredients?
It's a great question. And I guess I want to start with maybe talking about the difference between recycling and upcycling. So recycling, you would take a material, a plastic or a metal, for example, and you'd break it down to its original components, and then you turn it into something similar to what it was or slightly lower quality than it was. So typically with plastic, you can never make it quite the same quality.
Yeah.
With upcycling, this is how I like to think of it, is you're breaking sort of ingredients down, or you're taking something that has been considered waste or, a side stream or a byproduct of something else. So it's a secondary item, secondary product or ingredient. And then you would add things to it. And then that finished product would then become something more than what it was. So you're lifting it up within the system that it's come from.
So effectively you're taking what would have been possibly a waste product and creating a brand new delicious product.
And in the case of food, that's exactly what we're doing. Yes. So we are looking at side streams from food and drink manufacturing. So for example, when you make an apple juice, where does all the skin and the pulp go and the fiber? So we collect that because normally it gets discarded and not valued. And we add other ingredients such as oats or rye flakes and other nuts and seeds, like you can see in our granolas that are in front of us. And then we bake it and turn it into a granola. And the granola is obviously a higher value product than the pulp was on its own. So that's why we call that an upcycled granola.
Genius. Absolutely great. So why did you take part in the Big Food Redesign Challenge?
The Big Food Redesign Challenge was such an amazing opportunity, and it came about at a time when the business we'd had kind of hit our first few milestones. So Nibs, etc. had launched into initial kind of retailers. We'd gained some really good traction, and now it was time to scale. We needed some investment. We needed to sort of build our exposure and brand awareness as well. And as a small business, you don't often have the funds and the resources to, do a huge campaign.
Yeah.
And so all of these things kind of came together, and the challenge offered an opportunity to build brand awareness, to support, potentially fund part of our NPD and our growth, but also be a part of this really big movement. And I'd followed the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for a little while, and I loved the sort of initiative and the growth that it had instigated in so many small, medium, big companies, organizations around the world. And so I had already admired kind of the work that the foundation was doing. And I thought, what an amazing opportunity to try and be part of that. And if it's around sort of, the food system and shining a light on the amount of waste that is happening. I mean, as a brand that has been championing since day dot, so since 2018, what we need to do, we need to eliminate food waste. That's been our mission since the beginning. I could not be a part of this challenge. And so that's why, I almost missed the deadline, but managed to get to join.
I actually didn't realise that you've been going since 2018.
Yeah, well, actually, the Nibs, etc. blog about upcycling leftovers and zero waste recipes, I kind of birthed that into 2015. And then it grew offline into products and events, supper clubs, and eventually a product range, and incorporated that in 2018. I've been banging the drum about upcycling and eliminating food waste for years, but I would say that I guess there was a pre-COVID life, during COVID life, and then the post-COVID life, and they've all looked quite different.
Yeah, the next question was inevitably, what have been your main challenges? So have they evened out a bit since 2018, or has it just been constant?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone working for a startup or a small company will say that, or even a big company, the challenges are constant. I think they've looked quite different in different phases. But for the purpose of this chat, let's talk about, I guess, some of the challenges while we were part of the Big Food Redesign Challenge.
Yeah.
And so during that time, we looked at refining and improving our current processes for upcycling, but also looking at our next products that we were developing, so new product development. So in terms of looking at our existing supply chain, I guess some of the challenges were more surrounded by costs. So we'd ironed out, the kind of types of partners that we needed to work with to upcycle the ingredients smoothly and incorporate it into our recipes. But it's quite expensive when you're a small business to kind of invest in this sort of these systems and these sort of infrastructure. So the costs have always been sort of quite prohibitive if you're trying to do it at scale. And then on some of the new products that we were developing, we were looking at using other byproducts. So we use apple pulp is the hero byproduct here, but we're looking at heroing, brewers spent grain, which is high in protein and fiber, or rape meal, which is the byproduct of making rapeseed oil, also high in protein and fiber. And these, again, are supply chains that don't exist for these ingredients because they're seen as waste. And so finding new suppliers, building relationships with new suppliers, showcasing why it's a better idea for them to work with us to upcycle this and keep it in the human food supply chain rather than send it to animal feed or waste to energy is a challenge. And sometimes you find people that are so gung-ho, they totally believe in what you're doing. On a personal level, they understand the bigger picture. But other times, you speak with, sometimes it's often the bigger companies actually that an head of operations is being paid to be really efficient and keep costs down. And as soon as you ask, can we explore doing a process differently? We want to take on a lot of the work, but we need some input from you. And it's it's a great idea, but we don't have capacity for this at the moment.
Now, it's interesting you bring up those big companies, because recently my colleague Pippa spoke to Katie Carson at Tetra Pak, who are expanding beyond packaging to include technology process, product development, and they're actually putting in place incubation programs for early stage food startups. This is what Katie told Pippa when she was asked why it's so important to work with small businesses, not just the big ones.
The food sector is basically made up of SMEs. Over 90% of companies in food manufacturing are SMEs. So I think it's really important to, support those companies, particularly those that are looking to be a bit disruptive. So to, look at different ways of producing food in more regenerative ways and, unlocking that potential to change and transform our food system. We're really looking at opening up both our internal networks and expertise as well as our external business to understand, what are the specific needs of those companies to help them sort of to take, their product development to the next stage. So that could be, it could be sort of, very much taking the production from kitchen scale to, larger production scale. It could be about looking at how you can actually develop the processing technologies to integrate regenerative ingredients into food products. That could be, fonio or upcycled ingredients. As well as, the many different things that, some of these companies really need to help, them unlock those sort of opportunities.
Well, there you go. So did you need to engage with anyone outside of your organisation? You've already said you did approach people, but on the whole, with dealing with other supply chains, etc., how did you find that journey?
Yeah, since the beginning of starting Nibs, etc., it's been about collaboration across the industry, from suppliers through to service providers, through to the retailers and the end consumers. So it's really a project about collaboration. But yeah, during the Big Food Redesign Challenge, it was a great opportunity to kind of rebuild relationships that we'd explored in the past and start new ones. So, for example, speaking directly with farmers that are milling their own grains that have byproducts that are coming off of that. I talked about the rape meal earlier, so byproduct of rapeseed oil. So these are all sort of kind of new relationships that we were exploring, and required a little bit of coordination between all of us to make sure we could get samples on time. And we definitely, some of these have short shelf life, some of these ingredients. So we hit a few challenges when we were, doing lots of lab tests and things, and doing lots of recipe development. So yeah, but we are constantly looking to work with other people around the industry, because we can't solve this issue of food waste on our own. And so it requires a bit of engagement from everyone.
Yeah, you literally have started from scratch, haven't you, and just worked your way up and through. Pippa also asked Katie what advice she would give to any new startup beginning their circular food design journey. Here's what she had to say.
You need a good product. I think you need a product that consumers will want to buy. Yeah. So, there needs to be the taste. It's also all about the price point. But I think it's also about really understanding that ecosystem, within which you're operating, and understanding who are the partners or the sort of collaborators that you can work with to help unlock some of the barriers that you will inevitably come across in that food design journey.
So, Chloe, if you could wave a magic wand, what enablers and resources do you think you would produce to allow people to scale nature-positive food and make it the norm?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. And it'd be interesting to hear, I think different people coming from different parts of the food industry will have maybe different answers. But for me, from the experience of building Nibs, etc., throughout this challenge, and as I kind of look forward in terms of how we grow, I think there are a few things that would be pretty game changing. And the first I think is deleting the word waste from our vocabulary, from our systems, from just existence. Like if you look in nature, I remember I was thinking back on a biology class. The word waste never appeared in text. It was always, even it would be feces that fed into the soil and the transition of energy through organisms. Like you never heard the word waste. And I think there's really a lot we can learn from that. As soon as you delete the word waste, you call it resource, for example. Suddenly it's not a food waste bin, it's a food resource bin. And resource, offers opportunity. And if we know where that is, then we can solve for that. And opportunity is exciting. And which then leads me to my second thing, which is we need to understand where the resource is available, where the food waste, as we call it now, is available. And if that's not reported on, if that's not... And I understand, sometimes it's shameful, it's embarrassing, it's bad practice, so people don't want to talk about it. And I think we need to drop our egos. Pride goes out the window. I think it's the right thing to do, is to share where food waste is available, whether it's at manufacturing, whether it's at farm levels, whether it's in consumers or retailers. That needs to be public information. If we don't know where the problem is, then we can't solve it. And this ties back to what you were saying about the importance of small and challenger businesses. We can move fast, we can be agile, we can react really quickly. So if this becomes available, imagine the opportunity to solve for all of these problems that we currently have, and the nutrition that we can pack back into our food systems from all these byproducts that are being lost. So I think those would probably be the two things that if I could wave a magic wand, would I think open up a whole world of opportunity to solve this food waste crisis.
You are so inspirational to listen to. Oh. I'm just going to ask an extra question that wasn't please. Actually on our script. Do you get a lot of Chloes from 2018 coming to you now for inspiration and support and advice?
Gosh, that's Chloe's from 2018. That's a funny way to think about it.
Sorry, off the top of my head.
No, I like that. I was like, do I? Yes, there are. So I'm part of this. I work in this co-working space for food and drink businesses, and it's quite fun because there are loads of people at different stages, like really, really early stage to big corporates that use it for NPD and all sorts of things, new product development. And so I guess I find myself somewhere in the middle, which naturally means that I have been through the early stages. And I think for the first time in my life, I feel like I understand where I've come from and what I've gone through, and I can actually answer questions when people say, how did you deal with this challenge, or how did you pitch this retailer, or how did you put your first fundraising deck together, and yes, also around sustainable supply chains, like where do you begin, how do you approach this, and And it's quite nice to feel useful and also reflect on what I've learned. So yes, I guess there are a few Chloes from 2018 coming through.
I think that's brilliant, and you should be very proud of what you guys have achieved.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for joining us here today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, it's been an honour to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much to Chloe, Katie, and of course, Pippa. If you enjoyed this episode of the Circular Economy Show, please share with your colleagues and friends, and don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'll see you next time.